Yo, people, welcome back to the YouTube channel. You already know what time it is. It's time for another episode here on the YouTube, and of course another collaboration joined by from CBS Ben Jacobs. We've had him on the channel before. Absolute pleasure to have you once again. How are you doing, bro? How you doing?
Really good. Looking forward to the end of the World Cup. Is it going to be Messi finally winning one or back-to-back for Mbappe?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, I must say. Part of me says that my heart can't take another Messi walking past the World Cup trophy, tears in his eyes. I don't think anybody needs to see that. And obviously France have already got one, but they are my sweepstakes, so we can't really lose. It's a good situation to be in, I'm not going to lie. Let's get into it because, of course, with Chelsea, just before the transfer window opens, you know, there was always going to be an element of, you know, transfer rumors and silly season. And I want to ask you as well, do you feel like, to start off the top, do you feel like because of Todd Boehly coming in and him being a little, there seems to be a lot more, you know, reports publicly where Marina kind of kept behind closed doors. Do you feel like agents like maybe George Mendes and clubs who are trying to off sale are linking their players to Chelsea just because of that new regime of being quite outspoken, quite public, quite transparent? Is that something that we have to look out for in this transfer window, where players might not really be of serious interest to Chelsea, but because of that new element that they're going to get linked just to drive the price up, etc.?
Well, I think when you have an interim sporting director who's also part of the ownership group, there's always going to be more out there because Todd Boehly wears many caps. And as he goes into the market as an interim sporting director, but also as chairman and owner, he's meeting a variety of people. And those people talk, especially to us journalists. So it is possibly a theory that there's far more of Chelsea's strategy and targets being put out there. But I think more important than that, because Todd Boehly's still building a team, and how that team operate and whether it's more in the public than under the Abramovich era or less remains to be seen. But I think the most significant thing for me as to why Chelsea are being linked with so many players is just the necessity. And that would have been the case if this was exactly the same situation under Roman Abramovich as well. What we're looking at with Chelsea is a team that were predominantly behind their rivals due to circumstance and sanctions, then new owners coming in as well, a large amount of outgoings, a managerial change, and a need for incomings. So if you add all of that up, of course, Chelsea are looking at a variety of targets. And when you go out into the market, and if we flash back to the summer, you need defenders and multiple defenders. Midfield needs strengthening. That's still the case. And attackers, and you're focusing on youth. Even if you have 5 targets and you're confident of getting all 5 of those targets in each of the different positions and a variety of ages and levels of experience, you probably need to put feelers out in the market for in excess of 30 names. And you're serious about those 30 names because you'll never get every single target that you want. There'll always be rivals. Sometimes you'll be able to sign a player, but you're not happy with the price, so you walk away. Maybe the underrated thing that fans don't always appreciate is it's not just agents fueling this. Sometimes it's the football clubs, because if you're Chelsea and you've got target A and target B, then to get target A, you might want it out there that you're chasing after target B, because when you go to negotiate with target A, you're building that, for want of a better word, fake or false rival. So the selling club for your primary target goes, yikes, they're quite prepared to sign another target who's a similar profile, who's a similar price. And you can use that as part of leverage as you look to try and get the best possible deal for the player that you actually want.
And I guess we've seen that already. Obviously, last summer we saw a lot of, you know, transfer targets that were in line with Barcelona. They very much learned quite quickly that they're not going to get everybody they want. Now they seem to be building a, I want to call it, under 23 super team. We've seen links to Vlahovic, who's 22, Felix, who's 23, and we're going to get onto those names in a minute. But I want to start with obviously yesterday's headline news, which was Fofana that signed or is signing in January from Molde, the young striker. And I just want to ask, do you do you know the plan with this player in terms of Chelsea are going for a lot of young strikers? We've seen Makuku as well from Dortmund. You know, like I said, João Felix Nkuku may be joining. Looks like he's joining it from Leipzig there in the summer. So a lot of young forwards, but of course, game time development has got to be key for their development. Obviously, Chelsea are trying to purchase a lot of clubs around the world in different continents to maybe have those feeder clubs that can develop. Do you know what the plan is with Fofana to come in January now with this Broja ACL injury? Is he going to come into the first team, the PL2 team, or do you think it's likely for him to go out on loan? Because that gap between the Norwegian League and the Premier League is really a sizable gap for quality.
It is, and that's where over time the multi-club model comes in, because you sign a player and there'll be pathways within the model rather than externally. Datro Fofana's not ready for Premier League football. That's the first thing to say. Yes, he could feature potentially in games away from the Premier League if there's nothing at stake and he was in a Champions League squad. We're obviously speculating in future seasons now or in the Carabao Cup, but generally speaking, it's not as simple as Amanda Broja is injured, so in comes another youngster into the fold. However, what we do know is that this transfer was something that Brighton thought they were going to get done originally. So in Potter, Macaulay, and now Winstanley, who's at Chelsea Football Club, you've got three individuals that know Fofana very well. And what I know is that when Brighton were talking about signing the player, it was very much somebody that would step up into their first team, and although not play necessarily for the first team immediately, be brought through within 1 to 2 seasons by the time either he turned 20 or 21. So if Potter has his way, that approach could be very similar. But of course, Chelsea have got a lot more depth. But I certainly don't see Datro Fofana being thrown immediately into Premier League football. But what we are seeing from Chelsea is them include young players in the first team squad. So you just never know, because when you transfer from a side like Mulder, and it's important to state that there's an agreement in place. The deal is not official yet, but it is very likely to be. It's heading in that direction because Chelsea have offered a little bit more money, and that is satisfactory to Mulder. So everything is moving towards the teenage striker joining Chelsea and that becoming official very soon. And then it's about pathways. And Chelsea are in a slightly difficult position in the sense that they know what they want to do strategically with their model to create the pathways, but obviously the full infrastructure and personnel behind it are not in place. So players are going to arrive and have to buy into the long-term plan and pathway before the infrastructure necessarily exists. And I think that a good example of that in terms of being patient is going to be Datro Fofana. So there's an opportunity, for example, to sign and loan back to Mulder or another club. There's an opportunity to develop in-house and give limited opportunities. And then ultimately there's that hope that he will end up being a very significant first team player. And Chelsea's strategy, as you outlined, is buy young and buy quality, and then gain that longevity and loyalty. And this, I think, is a very good example, because you can say at around 10 million euros, if it works out, you've got a bargain and you get 10 years plus out of the player. If it doesn't work out, then you'll sell and probably still make more than the 10 million, because even if Fofana only plays a handful of games for Chelsea, there's always other Premier League clubs, Championship clubs, potentially teams within Chelsea's model or outside of Chelsea's model that they can use to cash in. And if you times this type of signing by, let's just say, 10 over the next 18 months and 3 windows, then of that 10, statistically, 1 or 2 will be significant Chelsea first team players over time. And the other 8 might make you, even in a pessimistic market value estimation, because of their age and potential at other levels, double what you paid for them if the fee was 10 million euros. So then 8 times 10 million euros, 80 million euros, and that funds a Declan Rice or a more established style player. So this is where the finances of the model are really significant, because if you've got the pathways, if you give yourself the best possible chance of making all 10 youngsters succeed, the ones that succeed are bargains and you've got their loyalty on long-term contracts. And the ones that fail, you will still make a profit on that you can invest back into your first team or football club.
Yeah, I think this is very similar to what I saw Michael Emeralo do at Chelsea when he signed to Kevin De Bruyne. Courtois, they were heavily involved in that Belgian market. Obviously, we signed the two Hazard brothers as well, and Mohamed Salah, and a lot of players we were signing that were very young. But obviously, we didn't have the manager, maybe in Jose Mourinho, to match, and the longevity and the thought process from higher up to have it be more of a long-term sustainable way of running the club from a first team standpoint. We were still really chasing those trophies. Do you sense already that Todd Boehly, I guess, with this model, because he's obviously wanted Ronaldo in the past, he's obviously deviated away from that now, and we're really seriously going in for this under 23s, buy them before they kind of go to their Brightons, before they go to the clubs like the Benficas, who have had an incredible recruitment from South America in recent years. And now we're looking at the Enzo Fernandezes and the Darwin Nunezes and the Alvarez at Manchester City, all of these players that have been scouted from different clubs in South America and brought over. We're trying to almost cut out the middleman and say, right, we don't want to pay premium prices for these players once they come over here to the Brightons, to the Benficas, and then have to pay 100 million for the Casados, etc. We want to get them before that, and either get them to the first team or turn a profit. So I think business-wise, it's logical, it's smart, it makes sense, and hopefully it does show some success afterwards. In Fofana, I feel like you feel like the Belgian league, the Dutch league, these would be the next places, the next steps from the Norwegian league in terms of development. Is Chelsea's multi-club model, how far away do you think that is from happening? Because of course they're trying to juggle all these things at the same time. They've got different people in different positions to handle this, new stadium development, all these type of things. Are we going to see this model kind of transpire soon in the next year, 2 years, or is it going to take longer than that to process all of the I guess you've got you're buying football clubs, it's not going to be easy?
Well, I always say that building a model is basically like having a baby time-wise as a minimum. And in the same way that when you have a baby, for most people anyway, you get into a relationship, you decide to have kids, and then when you're pregnant, it's 9 months. And building a model has that same courting process. And then there's obviously a business transaction, and you have to do that in multiple regions with clubs to get to your end goal, which is your model. So nothing is really going to happen overnight, but we're going to see clues as to the direction of travel on the global side as Chelsea expand their brand and then connect it to everything that's more Chelsea focused. So first question Todd Boehly has to answer is, how many clubs does he want? Is it like the City Group, and how quickly will he buy them? Or is it a slower process when the right opportunities emerge? And that might mean that Boehly only looks to invest in and or buy one or two to begin with. And on top of that, it doesn't have to only be clubs that you buy or invest in. It can also be strategic partnerships as well. The logic is essentially that the more clubs you buy, the more control you have over the standard of coaching, over the scouting, over things like shared data. And that allows you, if you own them outright, especially, to commercialize those clubs, but also have that consistency of style and coaching. So no one's saying, by the way, that if Chelsea buy a club, they own the club to the point where everything is only Chelsea. If they were to outright buy another club, they would have to respect that club's culture and development. It's not like you can kick everyone out and say, sorry, Chelsea are playing this formation, we want to play this formation. Chelsea are picking this style of player, we want you to pick the same. So the players around the player we're trying to develop and bring to Chelsea has an identical environment. It's not that rigid, but it obviously helps to have the ownership in the club, because you've got somebody in-house within your model and you can offer a player pathways, and potentially you can get around visa issues as well. That's another thing with Brexit. If Chelsea get clubs in the right places, they can give their younger players enough game time, assuming the club thinks they're worthy of that standard and the manager picks them. So then when you then bring them back to Chelsea, you don't have the same visa problems because they score higher on the system. So that's important as well. But timescale, I think it's a bit irresponsible to say it's going to happen at this speed. But what we know is the first step to building the model beyond putting it on paper, and it will be trial and error, I think, to some extent, but Boehly's got a clear idea of the direction of travel. First step, is making appointments within the football department. So what we're going to see is a lot of incomings on the recruitment side with global titles, and a lot of people that potentially have crossover in titles. So Lawrence Stewart is a technical director with a global focus. Christopher Vivell, when he comes in, is a technical director seemingly with more of a Chelsea focus. And it wouldn't surprise me if we get a lot more of that. And the titles are not as important as the dynamic. It's a Liverpool-style transfer committee that is likely to head over time into more of a Manchester City structure with multiple clubs. And Tom Glick is taking the responsibility for allocating the regions and the clubs. But until Chelsea actually invest in or buy or partner with other clubs, the model is more theoretical, and everyone's still pulling towards Chelsea. But as and when they add other clubs, certain individuals might focus more on the development of those clubs and start window planning, and others may be more about Chelsea and the imminent and the today and the established talents. But for now, it's just a pool of talented individuals, some who have got youth experience, some who have got senior experience, some who have got model experience, some of whom have got Premier League experience, and some, of course, have been at Chelsea for longer and know the club and its fabric and its culture and its academy. And they have to find a way of creating a dynamic that works. And working means two things. One, understanding lanes and overlap. Two, understanding connection at all levels of the club. Three, having the freedom to debate and challenge, and disagreement over players is as important. And then four is who it feeds up to, which at the moment is Ben Barley and Todd Boehly. From there, once they focus on Chelsea and ultimately stabilizing the club, and if they keep investing in youth, and if they keep renewing contracts, and if they keep renewing players for the long term, then logically over time, they'll need less and less and less in the market. So once they get the first, I would say, 2 Graham Potter windows out the way, plus the one they've had, they can start thinking about not having to spend 250 million, not having to bring in 6 or 7 players. And from there, that's perhaps when we'll see them give more clues as to the direction of travel with the global model and who they might invest in, buy, or partner with. But what I do know is that region-wise, France is seen as very, very key. And contrary to some reports saying Sochaux is off the table, I'm still told that there's a very realistic possibility that a sale might be made. And Angers is another example of a French club that might be available for sale at some point. And not just Chelsea, by the way. Bournemouth's new owner, Bill Foley, is also looking at France. It's just seen by most people in the game as a real breeding ground for quality young talent that you can unearth early and develop through. Portugal's another one. Some people will tell you Brazil as well. And obviously, Boehly has to think about the brand as well. Is it going to be beneficial to invest in a MLS or USL club because of the 2026 World Cup? And does that have the right level of standard? And when you look at US men's national team players that are all gravitating from being American born to playing in Europe, you could logically argue, yes, that the market tells you that American talent is also a big window of opportunity to bring to Europe early and then develop within your system. So it wouldn't remotely surprise me if, with the World Cup and with that precedent of American-born talent doing well in Europe, if that's a region as well that Todd Boehly sees as very significant. But what's going to happen is some pick and mix global model where the January window shuts and Boehly just says, I'll have a bit of that, I'll have a bit of that, I'll have a bit of that. I'm going to buy or invest in 6 or 7 clubs. I sense the development of the global model, certainly from the perspective of buying or investing in any clubs, is going to take some time. And what they really want to nail down before that is kind of the workflow of recruitment individuals at the football club.
Make it all very much one and make it make sense, kind of, because it's a lot of staff that they're bringing in. Obviously, Lawrence Stewart is still contracted to Monaco, as you said, until February. So he'll join after the transfer window. You got Val coming in as well from RB Leipzig. You've got Joe Shields on gardening leave. You've got so many guys coming in from different clubs. And it's going to take time for that to take shape. And I wonder, when we go back to January, just how many players do you think Chelsea are or how many players do you think they're potentially going to try and bring in January in terms of recruitment for the first team, and what positions? Because there's this danger of maybe doing too much without the full recruitment structure there. Do they trust what they've got at the moment existing before those guys come in to do this window and to address the situations and the positions that they need to? Because this ACL injury is now just confirmed 100%. They have to go and get a striker. If it's not Fofana that's going to be in the first team, it's going to have to be somebody else. The right back situation for a lot of fans is a big issue, but the midfield issue is definitely something that they know about due to their interest in Alvarez from Ajax in the summer. So how many players do you think Chelsea are capable of really going to get?
I think they'll be busy, partly out of necessity, and also because it's Graham Potter's first window. It's Kyle McCauley's first window. It's Paul Winstanley's first window. They're going to have to find a way of stamping their mark. And more important than this investment in young talent is about the urgency of turning around the season. So Chelsea get back within Champions League contention so they don't have an early exit from the Champions League. And that's why I think that Chelsea will be very busy and support Graham Potter. Whether or not that's with some insane 200 million plus spend remains to be seen. I doubt it, because in the summer, they're going to have to budget for big money in the race for Declan Rice and Jude Bellingham, and that will influence how busy they are within the January window. So I don't think they'll panic buy, but I certainly look at, as the window opens, the run of fixtures that Chelsea have got. And that January window run-in into February is vital to the entire season. So before the window opens and on the day the window opens, you've got Bournemouth and Nottingham Forest. And I think that Chelsea have to get 6 points, or certainly 4 points, to maybe calm a little bit of the fan base. But if you take those games away, and then we look at what's happening in the heart of the window and onwards, it's 2 games against Manchester City, 1 in the FA Cup. It's away at Fulham in a London derby. It's home to Crystal Palace in a London derby. And then it's Liverpool and Fulham again and West Ham again. So basically all during the window, it's London derbies or massive games. And then you've got Dortmund and Spurs away, which isn't easy, and home to Southampton, which will maybe have a little bit of added bite, at least off the field, because of the manner in which Joe Shields joined. So by the time we get into late February and early March, Chelsea are not necessarily going to have a run-in at the end of the season if results go against them, where they can say, well, if we hit form at the end of the season, we'll climb back into the Champions League. They might find themselves too far adrift because none of the fixtures are particularly easy. So usually we say March, April is vital as you try and push for top 4, especially if you're outside it. But even though we're still at quite an early part of the season, because we haven't even played 19 games and a halfway, I sense that there will be a real crystallization around where the direction of travel is on the field in that mid-January, early February leading up to Dortmund. And that's why Chelsea will want to back Graham Potter and make sure that he's got every weapon at his disposal, leading maybe to a more significant January than if results were going a little bit better, or if Thomas Tuchel had all that investment and was still at the football club. Because you've got to appreciate that this is Graham Potter's first opportunity to have a window, and he will want to make his mark. All that said, I think if we discount the young players and the ones for the future and those that are more cost effective, we're really looking at 3 key positions. Striker is the main one, naturally. Midfield needs strengthening. Whether or not that's January or the summer or both remains to be seen. But Edson Alvarez is a name to watch in January. Declan Rice, Jude Bellingham, Chelsea are in the race for, but there's plenty of other clubs. They're not necessarily front runners for either. I think they're more confident on Rice than Bellingham from what I understand, but it's highly, highly unlikely that they're going to get both. And if you were to get both, you've got to find those finances, which again might lead to a quieter January. So I think Edson Alvarez is one to watch. Caicedo at Brighton, I still don't think is going to happen in January. It's not unthinkable, but I genuinely believe that the links will come because of the Brighton contingent at Chelsea, but it's a much harder transfer than most are reporting because of how he's represented and who's owed what because of pre-existing deals before he joined Brighton. So it's not the easiest deal to negotiate, even if there's a desire there from the player. And on top of that, Brighton are going to be holding out for an amount that is way above market value. So I think we're going to have to wait and see on that one. I think that Mohamed Kudus had a good World Cup as well at Ghana. He was a player that flagged before the World Cup, maybe one to watch. Amrabat's going to be linked with a variety of clubs as well. But within the context of the January window, midfielder is going to be important, and also working out whether Chelsea can extend the deal of Jorginho as well. Striker we've mentioned, and then on top of all of that, right back. And it wouldn't surprise me in terms of the fullback area, by the way, if Chelsea come back in for Denzel Dumfries. I still don't think that he's entirely off the radar. And Frimpong is another name that could become available in the market as well. But again, I think you're going to get a lot of pushback at the club end about making a sale there in January, but just another name to throw into the equation. So I think that if an ideal world happened and the numbers all added up collectively across the transfers to keep Chelsea within budget, 3 would be the goal.
The target, the goal.
2 to 3. I don't think it's 4, 5, 6, but it might be 4, 5, 6 if we factor in Fofana and any younger names. But if we're talking about players you can throw straight into the first team tomorrow, 2 to 3 would be the ideal. So if they could get a midfielder and a striker, then they'll call that window a 7 out of 10. If they get a defender, midfielder, striker, it's an 8 out of 10. If they add all the young players they want, it's a 10 out of 10. But you've got to factor in that all the planning, all the names arriving after the January transfer window that are looking ahead to future windows, they're obviously all pre-allocating or pre-spending budget, so Chelsea can really make a push over the summer. And
are they being informed of, I would assume that they're being informed of this January window and the targets. Are they allowed to be informed? Not necessarily.
Because of the non-compete rules and because of existing contractual obligations, you have to be very careful what you do and don't share. And I think that will be more applicable to Lawrence Stewart, who's kind of handing over at Monaco, versus Joe Shields, who effectively was told to walk out the exit door instantaneously at Southampton. But the gardening leave is there as a restriction. It's there as a non-compete. It's there to stop you taking information you legally knew at your previous club and using it to the advantage of your new club. So it's not actually as easy as you might think, just to say to Joe Shields or Lawrence Stewart, listen, I know you're not contracted to Chelsea yet. I know you've not started at Chelsea yet, but would you mind joining this meeting, or would you mind taking a look at this? You have to either do it within legal boundaries, or you have to accept that you can't take a step away and then engage with them when they're actually able legally to be contracted to the football club, which in Lawrence Stewart's case is February. And Joe Shields may even be a little bit later. I think I was slightly misquoted on this because I said that Lawrence Stewart was February and Joe Shields would be after the window. But remember that Joe Shields had 6 months at Southampton. So February the 1st, seemingly, unless they've brokered a deal with Southampton, and I'm not aware that they have, could be a little bit early. So he might not be in until late February, March even, before he can actively start working at Chelsea. And that's important because this recruitment think tank really isn't fully functional yet. And until it becomes fully functional, the direction of travel is not entirely clear.
And there's, as you're naming the players, we're establishing that there's always a list for each position. You've named maybe the top targets, the Bellinghams, the Rice. I agree. I think Bellingham is a massive long shot, just considering, you know, the other clubs interested as well. You see Liverpool there, Manchester City there, Real Madrid were previously there. Does Enzo Fernandez fall on this list anywhere for Chelsea? Or is that a player that is just, with the release clause, I think, of 110 million euros, and Benfica, their new president coming out and saying basically Rui Costa, a former legend player, that they're just not entertaining any bids in January. So unless you're paying the release clause, you're going to have to wait until the summer. And we know in the summer, then again, Manchester City, Liverpool, Real Madrid. Is it just a Chelsea in a position where they're kind of not able to go toe-to-toe with these clubs? Or do you think they can, because we saw in the last window, they struggled with Barcelona?
Yeah, and part of that was maybe the fact that you've got a very experienced recruitment team at Barcelona and a new one at Chelsea, and they wanted to make a statement that they were behind. And it's no criticism of the ownership group. They were simply behind in the race. And I don't think fans have enough slack to them for that they buy a club, they join basically when the window opens with an entirely new team, and they've had no pre-planning. And then they change their recruitment team, they change their board. And although Marina and Buck were there as kind of advisors, very difficult to play catch up because other clubs were talking to these players and able to show them a clear plan. Whereas anyone joining Chelsea in the summer that was pitched to in January or in March or in April or in May would have said, who are the owners? And there were large periods where no one knew because there were multiple suitors. Then they'd have said, who's the manager? Is Tuchel definitely staying? And although perhaps at the time the ownership group on day one would have said yes, you just can't tell because there's a history at any football club of making wholesale changes. Who else is going to come in? And all these other questions that I honestly don't think anybody could have answered on day one. So that creates instability. And then with the volume of outgoings, players start to talk to those they know and say, well, why is Rudiger leaving? Why at the time did Azpilicueta want to leave? Why does Christiansen want to exit the club? Why can't Kante agree a new deal? And it all bubbles towards this feeling of what's going on inside at Chelsea. Is it a safe move? Is it a stable move? And then when you then start a window where you think you've got stability, fans perhaps think, great, this ownership group are ambitious. They've got money. Why can't we sign Rafinha? Why are we losing out with the Jules Koundé thing? But there's always reasons bubbling in the background. And Chelsea was simply behind because strategically, the recruitment department at Chelsea for 6 months or so, for various reasons, were not able to function in the same way as their rivals. And this is a factor as well with Enzo Fernandez. And if you have a good World Cup, and he has had an incredible one, you get interest. But some clubs predate Chelsea in that interest. And then if you are Enzo Fernandez, are you going to try and drive a move in January? Or are you going to wait and work out what you've got in the summer? And that's another factor here. So Benfica, if they were to accept an offer, and it is an if, know that it's going to be extortionate. It's going to be well above market value.
They've literally just paid 10 million for him in the summer from River Plate.
So then why are they going to sell him in January just because there's a load of interest? They're not, because as you say, he's new to them. And the fact also, by the way, that Ramos is there as well and he's out on the market means that Benfica have to protect their own interests. So they're going to be very bullish about any sale. And Ramos has got 120 million euros release clause. PSG nearly signed him last summer and lots of Premier League clubs are interested. Chelsea weren't one of them. Let's see whether that changes, but he's not on their radar. Strikers that we haven't mentioned that are above him in the queue have historically been people like Ivan Toney. Let's see whether he gets a lengthy betting ban. Jonathan David is a player that Graham Potter likes. So Ramos hasn't really been on Chelsea's radar, but Wolves, Southampton, Nottingham Forest, some would say Manchester United. So then when you factor in Enzo Fernandez, if Ramos goes, and Benfica were more resigned to the fact that he might, over the summer, for the right price, then can you then be more bullish about Enzo Fernandez? And as you rightly say, he's new to them as well. I think he's only played something in the region of 24 games for his club. So January for me is not a possibility there. Maybe some clubs are working on him either for the summer or 2024. And Liverpool and Chelsea are two clubs that have scouted him. They see the potential there. They believe that even if they overpay, there is still value over time because you've got a 21-year-old. He is relatively versatile in terms of his skill set, in the sense that he can win the ball. He can be tenacious. He makes good runs off the ball. He is a positive passer. He's a direct passer. He knows how to speed up or slow down the game. So he's a string puller. Yeah. And those attributes are really relevant and exciting. And you'd never call him a goal scorer per se. I think he's played. But
he can shoot from distance. Yeah.
And he obviously scored a goal at the World Cup against Mexico at the Lusail iconic stadium. He scored once as well, I think, in the Premier League for Benfica. Not afraid to pull the trigger. And when you pull the trigger, by the way, even if you don't score, from that kind of distance, you can get a parry from a goalkeeper. You can get a deflection. It can pull a team out of sync. So these qualities that Chelsea appreciate, but I don't think they're in any way banking on progressing this imminently. So then you have to say, well, Well, maybe, but then you have to say, well, if they're putting their eggs in the Declan Rice basket, and if they're looking at Edson Alvarez, and if they've still got Zakaria at the club, and if they keep Kante and or Jorginho, then where does Enzo Fernandez fit in? So I think this is a classic example of you enter the race in the long term, but you're doing that for multiple targets, and then they'll have to work out over time whether a player like that is feasible. But I think that Liverpool are the ones that are further along, but nobody's at the point where they think they can sign him imminently, because as you rightly say, he only joined Benfica relatively recently.
Yeah, and there's a clear, distinct difference between summer targets and January targets, and you can throw the Fernandez, the Bellingham, the Rice, you know, the really big, expensive deals in that summer bracket, and then you've got your Amrabats and your Alvarez's that are Januaries, and the hope is that one midfielder in January, one in the summer, one maybe cheaper, like your Amrabat at Fiorentina, who's had a really good World Cup that you say Chelsea are looking at. They seem to be taking this World Cup very seriously in terms of looking at players, scouting players, seeing who's on the market. And with the forwards as well, Vlahovic, you know, his situation's come up. I know you reported on that. Felix as well. João Felix looks like as if he's going to be leaving Atletico Madrid. He's been there for a long time. I felt for a long time that he needs to get out of there, just system-wise, style of football-wise. Where do you think Chelsea are in terms of their top target, in terms of a striker? And is there a specific style that they're looking at for the forwards? Because Chelsea have got their attackers. And how much, I guess, have the board looked at the previous attacking signings and said, okay, we've gone wrong, or the previous board have gone wrong this many times on attackers. We need to be very careful with our recruitment, even in January, for what looks to be, we need a forward, whether it be João Felix or Vlahovic on loans with options to buy, whatever it be. Is there a clear style, and is there a clear philosophy of how they want the striker to play and what type of striker they want? Because before it's been pretty scattergun. Chelsea just buy whatever big name is statistically doing well, regardless of whether they suit the team and the style of play.
Yeah, and then if the manager changes, not just in the striker position, you get left with a lot of spare parts that are not tactical fits, strategic fits, personnel fits. And this has been the problem for Chelsea, as you've rightly outlined historically. It's too early to really determine if there's that clear long-term strategy, because Graham Potter is new. And that's the balance, that in January, Chelsea need goals, and perhaps in the summer, they'll think more about strategy. And the oddity in all of this is that Raheem Sterling was brought originally to score goals, but is being utilised at times as a wing-back. So if you persist with that, then do you add somebody else in that original Sterling-like position that he enjoyed and thrived in at Manchester City? Similarly, you've got goal scorers potentially and goal creators in Ziyech and Pulisic. So their future in January is going to be really important as well. And it's funny how fans see someone like Ramos score a hat-trick at the World Cup and they say, we'd love him. He'd be a fit for a club like Chelsea, potentially off one game. And then Ziyech bosses an entire World Cup and shows that he can score, assist, lead, provide vision, tenacity, and even track back and defend. And if he wasn't a Chelsea player and everyone knew that he was unhappy at whatever club, hypothetically, he was at, there might be Chelsea fans saying, go out there and buy Ziyech. And even Pulisic had a good World Cup too. So maybe Potter decides to give more opportunities to one or both of those two and work out whether there's goals there. And if it transpires that they can be more pivotal and get game time at Chelsea, then the type of striker that you need becomes like a established Broja version that can lead the line, that can hold up the ball, especially because it's completely unclear in, let's say, 6 months or a season or two, if Aubameyang's going to stick it out at the football club. So therefore, Chelsea, I think, need a lead striker. And what's interesting, by the way, about Fofana is people will compare him to Drogba and say that he could fit that mould. But right now, Chelsea need, I think, a central, old-fashioned target kind of striker. But that's just my personal opinion. But if you look at the broader picture...
Like a Olivier Giroud, you would say?
Yeah, somebody that fits into that mould, somebody that can hold up the ball, somebody that can allow these versatile players from wide areas or central areas to run into the box ahead of them. And of course, someone that can be a predator in the box and finish. But if I were Chelsea, I'd want someone that can hold up the ball with their back to goal, that can get in the box and do things with their head and of course has the deftness of finish. So that's when you start saying Ivan Toney's a decent fit. I really like Jonathan David as well. Doesn't necessarily tick every box, but I believe
had a really poor World Cup as well, didn't he? Surprisingly.
Yeah. But if you look at what Jonathan David has done at domestic level and the fact that Potter likes him, I think you have to throw into the mix. Vlahovic, I'd be surprised if he's available in January, but in the summer of 2023, you might get a predator there. And Chelsea are certainly holding exploratory conversations, because every single person I've spoken to connected to Vlahovic, connected to clubs and connected to Juventus says there is, quote, a 100% opportunity of some kind of transfer in 2023. January feels too early, but Juventus' situation is perilous at the moment because of an investigation into their finances, a new board incoming. Let's wait and see at the end of the season whether Max Allegri stays or goes. He's got the backing of the club, but there is no club at the moment because there is no board. So what a turmoil there. So that's one to look at. And then I think with João Felix, Chelsea fans would love that signing, but it's about price. And make no mistake, from sources I speak to, there'll be no cut price deal. So we know he's unhappy. We know it's not a fit. We know that he doesn't love playing under Simeone. We know there's the whole free Felix hashtag going around. But Atletico Madrid want 100 million plus. And a lot of suitors that have made exploratory inquiries or are advancing this believe that something in the region of 70 to 80 million pounds is about the top end of what they would like to pay. So is there common ground here? And could Atleti settle for 100 million euros, which I don't even know what the maths is off the top of my head, but
85 million round about that,
let's call it. So then you're about 5 to 15 million shy, depending on your club and your valuation of what you'd like him for. But if Atleti turn around and say it's 100 million quid, maybe they want add-ons on top of that, then suddenly you're 20, 30 million apart. And it's a January window where spending is not usually that big. And they might hang on to him until the end of the season. They might stick it out with him. So it is about agreeing a fee with Atleti, who will hold out because there's a bidding war. And then it's about convincing the player. And at the moment, my understanding is that PSG have done more than most to convince João Felix that coming and playing with Mbappe and Messi, if he extends, is the right call. And that's for two reasons. One, because they're phenomenal players, but two, because there's a fair chance that both of those players will leave sooner rather than later at PSG. So there's almost like a succession plan of like, play with them, and then they'll depart, and the limelight and the freedom is all yours. And that is of appeal to a player like Felix because he's young, you know, play with Mbappe, maybe indefinitely, but from Messi's point of view, if he goes, when he goes, and he's bound to obviously eventually because of his age eventually, but if he doesn't renew, then suddenly you're part of this new generation. And PSG's strategy is buy young. So Felix ticks that box. And also sometimes their strategy is going to be specifically by young and by French. So Felix doesn't fall into that category, but you can see what they're trying to do. You can see what they're trying to build, and he could be a part of that project. Arsenal have made some inquiries, but nothing significant. Manchester United are keen as well. And again, Chelsea probably fall into this category of tracking, but not really showing their true colours yet. And, you know, I reiterate what I said before. Some clubs that want a player like Felix, that want a player like Bellingham, that want a player like Rice, are eventually going to work out if they're the front runner. And if they are, have to get that player at the expense of all the other names that they're working on, because to get Felix in January at 100 million will by default mean it's going to be very difficult to strengthen midfield and right back for Chelsea, because you might be coming in for Declan Rice at 70 million quid as well. And before you know it, you don't have the money to go for Edson Alvarez at 40, 50 million, Denzel Dumfries at 40, 50 million, plus whoever else you need in other positions.
It's balancing everything, isn't it? Yeah.
So I think this is where fans are a bit misled, because they think Chelsea are really active and confident on Rice. They think they might be in the equation for Bellingham. They think that they might be coming in for youngsters like Enzo Fernandez. And then they wonder why suddenly the names disappear. And when things aren't going right, fan bases then moan because they say, God, I can't believe we missed out on so many players. The amount of people on Twitter that send me a list of 20 names that Chelsea missed out on. But it doesn't work like that. You enter the race. If we're talking strictly about elite level players, like a João Felix, like a Jude Bellingham, like a Declan Rice, you enter the race for all of them. You're bullish on all of them. You would like all of them, but you're realistic. You know that very rarely are you going to get all of them. So you push as hard as you can in the hope that you at least get one, and then you back off the rest. And that's not failure. That is just business and the reality of the transfer market. And the final thing I would add with some of these players we've mentioned is just don't be surprised if they wait. Because why join Chelsea in January
when you can join in the summer and get a pre-season?
Yeah, it's also, though, mid-season. Some of them are off the back of a World Cup. And why take the gamble and then find Chelsea don't make Champions League football? It's a marginal gain decision with all these elite level players. So if they are 50% sold on Chelsea, 50% sold on, let's just say, Real Madrid or Arsenal, and then they could join now, but they basically know that in a few months' time, they can, as you correctly say, have the pre-season and make the move if it's a new country and settle and find a house and continue what they're doing with their existing club. So with Felix, it's a bit different because they're out the Champions League, but that was the logic with Nkunku, that he wanted the full season to see what he can do. And then he'll move on his own terms and in his own manner. And Bellingham's the same as well. So then you wait. And then instead of giving an answer now, I'm not saying this is the case with everyone, but instead of giving an answer now, you say, I'll let you know when the final pieces of the puzzle fall. So that's again why it's so important that Chelsea get into the Champions League. Otherwise, if players are scoring them a bit more dispassionately on points, and it's 50-50 between Arsenal and Chelsea, if Arsenal win the Premier League, qualify for the Champions League, and Chelsea finish in 5th place, then that could be a determining factor between a player that's 50-50 on the move in January, but by the time the summer comes along, they say, you know what, I've actually decided that it's going to be Arsenal because they've got Champions League and Chelsea don't. So this is why the next few months on the field with one or two targets, I certainly want to say every target, is going to be really, really important.
I think what I'm gathering is that some players will see Chelsea, like at Alvarez, we saw, was willing to drop it all at the drop of a hat in the last minute and join, and then couldn't get it done. Maybe an Amrabat, I'm not sure. But those bigger targets that you're talking about, they're the ones that are going to sit and maybe be a bit more mindful of who they select. Even a Rafael Leao, who's looking like he's not going to sign a new contract at AC Milan, there's no rush. And I agree with you. A lot of times the personal side is not taken into account with the January transfer window, how difficult it is for a player to uproot, move. We saw a couple of big moves last window, obviously Diaz, we saw Kulusevski as well. But it is difficult to do what they did, which is move country, settle down, and then get off to a great start in your club career and hit the ground running. And we've had some successful signings, you know, Gary Cahill's, David Luiz is in this window, but we've also had Fernando Torres and others as well. So it is a mixed bag. I'm very intrigued to see what happens because I think you're right. We do need two or three, for me, three targets in, but I think they will be maybe names that are not, you know, exciting, but maybe just get the job done. And I think that's probably what's more important right now, especially with what you spoke about earlier with the recruitment staff not being here yet, all of them in their full capacity, the budget and the transfer targets in the summer. If you want these big names in the summer, then you have to be careful with what you do in January. And also just the fact that you don't want to buy someone that you was really interested in and then it doesn't work out because maybe the team isn't balanced. They haven't sorted out certain important parts of the team and it's still imbalanced, still a bit of a mess. And then their confidence drops and then they become part of the problem instead of part of the solution, which has happened to maybe a few players. So it's going to be interesting. Lastly, on contracts, is there any update on Kante, Jorginho for new contracts? Obviously, we saw Mason Mount is still negotiating his contract as well. What's the feel on contracts at the moment?
Well, I think the contracts are linked in a weird way, particularly with the senior players. So the overview is that the ownership group want to reduce the wage bill. If they can, they want to make contracts more incentive driven, but not every player will take a more consistent or in some cases lower base wage with the promise of more money if Chelsea succeed. But it's clear with the younger players, Todd Boehly wants to lock in their loyalty and in return provide a strong financial offer for 5, 6, 7 years. So that's what we're going to be seeing with incomings or younger renewals. But with older renewals, it's about that disagreement, not in an acrimonious way, by the way, just purely from a business perspective, between Kante wanting, for example, a longer term contract and Chelsea wanting to offer him something slightly shorter, but also bring down his base wage. So Barcelona, for example, with Lewandowski, gave him a 3-year contract, I believe it was, but it declines financially over time because there's an acceptance that he'll be less and less involved. Not every player is prepared to accept that. And this is why I say that contracts are linked, because if Chelsea get Kante to agree to that, it will be the precedent for all senior players of a certain age and a certain wage, Jorginho included. And therefore, if you don't buy into that, I think any agreements are unlikely and players will look elsewhere. And if you flip it the other way, if the club give Kante what he wants, then they may have to give Jorginho what he wants. Otherwise, he's going to turn around and say, well, if you guaranteed Kante that length of contract and that money, why not me? Because we're both playing, let's say, if we're fit, the same amount of games, we're both as integral. So Chelsea have to be careful what precedent they set.
And there used to be an over 30 rule with the previous ownership. Obviously, now I'm guessing that doesn't exist. So, this is like a new way of doing things, isn't it?
Yeah, and obviously these are new contracts. So Reece James is the first senior hot prospect that they perhaps offered improved terms to. And now, effectively, they have to match that with Mason Mount. And that's not to say match it financially, but trust me, players talk. But it's certainly to ratio a similar offer to Mount in terms of length of contract and or percentage of increase. And therefore, if Reece James is seen as integral and Mason Mount is hyped up to the same degree, then Mason Mount's going to try and milk that for all it's worth through his agent and get the best possible deal. And then Chelsea, again, set that precedent. So when they go to other players over time that they want to renew, they have to make sure that they don't get caught in a position where the entire squad say, well, you overpaid a certain player, you gave them a massive spike to keep them, make sure that you do the same for us, otherwise we've got other options. So
especially in that under 23 range where it's like, if you offer Mason and Reece 250 each, then what's to stop Bellingham and Rice saying 250? But then you're competing with other clubs who are paying Jadon Sancho and Rashford 250, 350. So it could go up very, very quickly. And they actually said, didn't they, that reportedly they wanted to bring the wage bill down.
They do,
when they came in.
Or down or up, but with incentives. So down as a median for base wage, with more players being on a consistent plane, or up in the sense that everybody is earning a lower base or a fairer base collectively, bar perhaps the odd superstar here and there. And then if the club does well, everybody benefits. So you've actually got an incentive to succeed both individually and collectively, because then you could earn a whole lot more. But it comes with success, not just as a default, which is a smart strategy in theory, but in practice, you have to have player buy-in. And it's easier to get that buy-in from a new player because you're luring them over under that structure rather than existing players who perhaps say, well, why should I change when I was earning very well and liking my finances and my life under the old regime? So look at Barcelona, even though it's completely different circumstance to Chelsea, it's been easy for them to get new signings in the last window on their current financial model. It's been a lot harder for them to get existing players like De Jong and Dembele to take pay cuts because they're like, we're already contracted long term, we're already on good money, why should that change? So then coming back to your question, Kante and Chelsea are still apart in negotiations. No guarantee that he'll sign. He could easily leave Chelsea on a free transfer, but he's a humble guy, he's not a greedy guy, and he enjoys London life. So he would love to sign at Chelsea, but they're still well apart on terms. With Jorginho, my understanding is that there's nothing especially advanced and formal. So that's something for the new year. And again, Chelsea would like to keep Jorginho. Jorginho's mindset has changed, as I understand it. If you'd have spoken to Jorginho as the ownership group came in, I think he was plotting an exit and perhaps felt like Juventus might come in for him. Now, I think Koulibaly there and things settling under Potter, he will very much entertain a new deal. But again, it's got to be on the right terms. And I haven't dug too much on Jorginho, got to be honest. But my understanding, the last inquiry I made, was it will be something that gets more seriously discussed during the new year. So I think that they could certainly get Jorginho to stay. But like Kante, it's about what financial package and length of contract could be offered to him. And there's other clubs for sure that are looking at Jorginho, so he'll have leverage to offset against any Chelsea offer. And then with Mount, we just wait and see. From day one, as I've reported, even before the ownership group came in, they'd always said Mount and James, big priorities to get to renew. And I don't expect that to change. I fully expect Mason Mount to sign a new deal at Chelsea. But the caveat to that is that there's nothing locked in. There's no framework at the moment that all parties agree upon. So that's a work in progress. But I think there's no panic.
Worry.
That
Yeah.
is going to come in and sort of somehow steal Mount away from Chelsea. I firmly believe he'll sign, but it's a process, and it's perhaps not as routine or as smooth in terms of the ins and outs and the numbers as it's been with Reece James, which is why obviously nothing's been signed to date. But I don't think Chelsea fans should have any panic about losing Mason Mount, whereas I think that the futures of Kante and Jorginho are a bit more up in the air.
And I think if they're going to target all of these midfielders as well, you have to make room for those said midfielders to come in. Those midfielders that are going to come in are going to want to be starters. They're going to want to be integral parts of the team. And over time, Chelsea's big issue has always been having too many players on the books and not being able to bring in players, not because they didn't have the money, but surely because they didn't have the squad space, and that there was people blocking those places to be competed for. So that's going to be also a very interesting way of going about it, whether the new contracts, I don't expect both of them to sign. If both of them sign, I'd be extremely shocked. Even if one of them signs, I'd say, okay, interesting, but are they going to be starters with what you're trying to build in the future? I don't know. But yeah, it's been a brilliant episode, Ben. Absolute pleasure as always. Gone through everything really, between, you know, the positions, the transfers, the targets, the structure, the staff, the multi-club, and I guess the strategy with obviously buying a lot of young players and bringing in this under-23 super team it seems they're trying to build. So, you know, it's been an absolute pleasure. Please let them know where to find you, bro. Brilliant as always. Really good.
No, always enjoy coming on and keep up the good work. And one thing I just add in 20 seconds is there's surprises. There will be surprise names. There will be people like with Chukwuemeka that Chelsea just pull out their sleeve. And that's the beauty of a transfer window. It's frustrating as a journalist, by the way, but when you have a bigger name, when you have multiple suitors, or when you have an agent that loves to talk, then the whole process from our point of view, whether on record or off record, gets played out in a blow by blow. But often with a younger player in particular, it comes out the blue and it's kept under the radar, and red herrings are put out there on purpose to make sure that no other rivals get wind of how far advanced the club are at. So I fully expect Chelsea to announce a couple that take all of us by surprise. And that's the kind of beauty of the January transfer window as well. So keep an eye out for that. But if you want to follow me, at JacobsBen on Twitter, at Ben David Jacobs on Instagram, mostly dog photos on there, but brand new under the same handle, TikTok as well, Ben David Jacobs. So I've only actually posted one video, and unfortunately from a Chelsea point of view, it's on Mudryk and Arsenal, but over the next few weeks, I'll be uploading a bit more. So you can follow me on TikTok at Ben David Jacobs. And I just also want to take this opportunity to wish everybody a happy and a healthy festive period and new year as well. It's not been an easy year for a lot of people from a football point of view, but also from a personal point of view as well. So I hope that everybody is able to relax, have some time off work, enjoy the football when it returns, and just really have a happy, healthy and successful festive period and new year from a personal perspective and also from a Chelsea perspective as well.
100%. I echo that. And you guys have been brilliant with the content this year, man. Really supporting. The milestones have been insane. And then I'm really looking forward to ramping it back up now that the World Cup's coming up to a close. The Chelsea games will be back. Hopefully the team play better than they did in the first stint of the season. It might bring some joy to your days as well, but we can't guarantee, of course. But make sure you smash up the like, subscribe, leave your comments down below. I want to know what you guys think. Anything that we've discussed, the multi-club, I'm very interested to hear what you guys think of the multi-club plan, the under-23 recruitment, the staff coming in as well, of course, and obviously individual transfer targets. And it was good to have this longer form bit of content here to kind of give you a little bit more insight of the inner workings of Chelsea and what the plan is and how things actually transpire, especially when we don't get what we want as well. It's easy to celebrate when we get what we want in the window, but when we don't get what we want, we need to know why and how it all works. So until next time, big up your damn selves. In a bit, people. Peace.